I spent 20 years happily an atheist. Well, why would an atheist seek to learn core shamanism? That doesn't make a ton of sense, does it? Well, I was curious. At my first training, the basic in core shamanism, my first journey to the upper world, when I got to the second level to meet a teacher, who do you think appeared? Jesus and Mother Mary.
Welcome to the Awaken Magazine podcast, where influential conscious leaders come to share the real stories behind their spiritual journey and how they're helping others awaken to love. I'm your host, David Trotter. Question for you to get started: what happens when a psychiatrist experiences a spiritual awakening and embraces her calling as a shamanic practitioner? Well, I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Kerri Husman. She's a board-certified psychiatrist who helps people heal not just their minds, but their souls and their hearts. She bridges science and spirit through core shamanism, which we talk all about, healing touch, and compassionate care for those who are really struggling in life. Now, if you are drawn to deep spiritual conversations that go beyond the surface, you are in the right place. And I want to encourage you to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast on whatever platform you are watching or listening on. And perhaps share this episode with a friend, someone who is also ready to awaken on a deeper level. All right, let's dive into my conversation with Dr. Kerri Husman. Well, Kerri, thank you so much for taking time to connect with us today. It's great to be with you.
Great to be here, David. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm so excited to spend some time with you today.
Yeah. One of the things that I don't read very often in people's bios is that they wanted to be a shaman at a very young age. That is amazing that you had this sense, this knowing. And so how did that come up for you? How did you express it? And then how did your family handle that desire?
It's a great question, and it was really learning about my heritage. I had always heard about my German heritage and then a little bit about some Welsh heritage, but I thought that was it. And this was long before 23andMe and other ways to learn more about your heritage. But when I found out about this several generations back, a grandmother named Winona Chamberlain, and we have the whole genealogy going back to the late 1700s in the family. And I learned about her, and then I started checking out books from the library. We'd go to town every 2 weeks and get the library books, and I'm reading and reading and reading about the Iroquois because that's all I knew at the time. And it was so compelling reading about, I mean, it had an effect on me that I wouldn't have expected
Hmm.
at all. This is a very small percentage of my actual genealogy, but it was so important because I saw these pictures and I'm seeing these scenes and I would have dreams about them, and it was just there was a connection there. And so when I saw how they did medical work, because there was, some of the books I was checking out were about things like that. And I was just drawn to, well, this is I think I want to do this. I think I want to be this type of healer. And my mom just looks at me point blank and she's like, "Well, Kerri, you can't do that. You don't belong to a tribe." I don't, duh, wake up, kid.
How old
And
were you at the time?
I think I was about 8. Now, mind you, fast forward, I was prescribed or I subscribed to Psychology Today in 7th grade on. So, I was drawn toward this being able to help people, especially brains. Brains were fascinating to me. And there were probably some family history reasons for that. But as she said no, I said, "Well, then I think I wanna be a minister for kids. I wanna be, go into that realm because, well, that would work in the Missouri Synod upbringing that I had." And then I started helping with the younger students in Sunday school as I got a little bit older, in middle school, then I was helping with the elementary school kids. And I thought that was really fun because those the parables, I mean, it was very much New Testament, lots of love. Um, Unlike our sermons upstairs, the downstairs messages for the kids were much more compassionate, and so I could resonate and connect with that a little bit more deeply.
My goodness. And so now, at this stage in your life, you have somehow taken the windy road of not only being a medical doctor as a psychiatrist, but also what is called a core shamanic practitioner. And so, how did you find your way to experience both of these things in your life? Like, take us on the journey from seventh grade Psychology Today subscriber to now Dr. Kerri Husman.
I can do it in a pretty short version, and that was as I was going through school, I became more and more interested in brain health. I had a cousin with schizophrenia. I had an uncle who committed suicide when I was 15. So I had people having pretty serious mental health issues that I knew personally up close. And so
Hmm.
it became more important to me to be able to do something. And not necessarily for them specifically, but in general, like this has got to there's got to be a better way. And so going to undergraduate, majoring in psychobiology, getting to do amazing things. Small school, loved it, but was told repeatedly, don't become an MD because all you'll do is write prescriptions all day. That's all you'll do. You won't be able to actually fix anything, just slapping band-aids on. And I took that to heart. So, but I still wanted to go to medical school, so I decided I was going to be an OB-GYN because that's about half psychiatry. Ask any OB-GYN. Um, and I was like, I'm doing something then because I'm doing something with my hands. But I'm left-handed, and realistically, surgical knots and me are not friends. And I figured that out as I was going through medical school too. And then when I rotated on psychiatry, after rotating on OB-GYN, my next one was psychiatry. And within 2 days, I changed everything to psychiatry because sitting through rounds on the patients on the inpatient unit and hearing these stories and how they were being treated, it was like something was lit up in me. This resonates. This is where I need to be. Changed all my curriculum moving forward and have never really looked back. I've never regretted making this decision. I did, do a fellowship in child psych as well because again, working with kids was always really important to me. And again, that's where you can make so much difference. That impact of being able to address a trauma in a 3, 5, 8, 10 year old and helping them to not be burdened by that the rest of their life is, you know, there's nothing better, right?
Mhm.
So that's where that happened. And how did um, healing touch and core shamanism kind of find their way in? Well, as I've been writing lots of scripts, right? Even though, back in the back of the mind, that's what they said you're going to be doing is writing scripts all day long. Well, there was a lot of script writing. And then I started learning functional medicine. And because of my own personal health issues and seeing the health issues in my patients. And the thing about functional medicine is you're taking a much wider lens. You're looking at diet, lifestyle, sleep, stress management, and possibly supplementation with things that have evidence bases to be highly effective for typically reducing inflammation so you can actually make a difference in someone's life. Now, our antidepressants might reduce inflammation as well, but this is a different set of mechanisms. And so I had two people in my life who were dying of cancer. Stepdad, or sorry, father-in-law, stepmom, and using functional medicine to help them, highly helpful to a point, right? When you have a terminal cancer, it's going to possibly extend life and extend quality of life, which was accurate, definitely did. But I knew I could see the writing on the wall months ahead that I'm going to have to be able to do something more. And why do I feel like I've got to be the fixer? Well, look at my Enneagram or anything else. That's just the way the wiring is. But there's so much joy and so much play that comes from being able to do these things too. So I started learning healing touch because I had a reactivation of mono. And one of my functional med friends said, you need to talk to Laura and Maggie. These people are both deceased now. But I call up, Laura says, I've been expecting your call. And I'm sitting on my front porch. She's having me touch all these marma points and tell me when the energy shifts, Kerri. And I'm like, okay. I'm just following along. I hadn't been able to breathe for 3 weeks. She has me touch these points, and then she says, "Oh, just can you just check in with how your breathing is now?" My breathing was normal for the first time in weeks. And I said, "I have to learn this." So she said, "Well, why don't you stop by tomorrow so we can just make sure it holds?" Because I was thinking the next morning I'll wake up and, be still so tight chested and short of breath. Woke up the
And
next
this was
morning.
from a distance. She was
This,
not present, and
no,
you
not
were
present.
on, like, just a phone call or
Just a
Zoom
phone
or
call. Just a
yeah,
phone call,
and she's
front
telling you to
porch.
touch these different points, alright, and this modality, for those who are not familiar, is called healing touch,
Yep.
alright, and so you stop by the next day.
Stopped by the next day, and she did a session on me, and I felt a whole lot of things happening I'd never felt in my body before. And she was explaining things. She and Maggie both were explaining things as they went. Now, Laura and Maggie have been instructors in Healing Touch for decades at this point, have learned multiple other energy modalities, and I'm sure combining several of them, right, just from their vast
Mhm,
experience and training. And I was, again, just, I have to learn how to do this. It was very clear from the first time I met them that we would not have long together. I mean, they both died in a fairly short period of time. Brief illnesses, high, wonderful, wonderful individuals, still help from the other side. And so every time I would come in, they would teach me something new. So
mhm,
really, it was about me learning. And they were nervous about me learning core shamanism because I told them this little secret that I'd been thinking about this for years and years. And they were nervous because they had met people who work with middle world spirits who called themselves shaman, or they were tribal shaman who worked with middle world spirits, and they were fearful for my safety. They
now
didn't know what I would
real
be learning.
real quick, for those who don't know, what is core shamanism? What does that mean? Because people have heard the word shaman,
Mhm.
right? But what does that mean?
So, core shamanism is the techniques throughout time. So, if you go back to cave drawings up till today, on all the continents that have had people live on them. So, universal, near universal, or common techniques. That's it. So, you're not um, appropriating a certain tribal technique to do a certain thing. You're doing the things that Michael Harner, with his anthropologic studies for decades, learned with permission, with consent, and then distilled down so that you were not appropriating from any specific tribe. Because ultimately, we all have this in our DNA. We all have these techniques in our background because these techniques precede all the religions and faiths that exist now.
So they were nervous about you learning
Yeah.
this core shamanism because you might be engaging with spirits that might be harmful to you. Was their concern?
Yes. And their point's a valid one because in core shamanism, you're primarily taught to work with fully evolved, compassionate, helping spirits, and that means spirits that are dwelling in the celestial realms, like the upper world, the lower world, the kind of paradise heaven, if you want to call it that. So you're engaging with evolved, compassionate beings.
Hmm.
Middle world, as we know for those who work in this, are it's a mixed bag. You have suffering beings here. You
Hmm.
have quasi ethnocentric, quasi compassionate spirits. And these are spirits who are protecting their land, protecting their lineage. And as long as you are doing things that align with their needs, they may help you. And if not, and you don't know where those gray lines exist, right? Or where you've crossed them. And so
Hmm.
they were worried because they didn't know what kind of ethical training I'd be receiving. They didn't know who I'd be working with, and rightfully so. So I took a brief pause. I thought about it and I said, I'm still going to do it.
Uh, Dr. Kerri Husman is doing weird stuff, putting hands on people, healing energy, talking about middle world spirits. Okay, how did that go from the Missouri Synod, little girl helping out in youth group, to doctor of psychiatry, to now talking about some weird stuff, right? How'd you make that transition? How did you reconcile that in your mind?
So that's a great question, and it has not been bump free. I will say that. Um, Not everyone grasped that at first. My mom was shocked. She was worried that this would be black magic. Not
Mhm.
really knowing what black magic is, she just said, how do you know this is aligned with God? And so I had to tell her the story, you know, while I didn't share this with most of my family. I spent 20 years happily an atheist, stepping away from Missouri Synod's theology because it was the way I was brought up in it was you had to be constantly asking forgiveness. If you died, you'd be going straight to hell because you might have missed that last sin.
That last one. Dang
Yep.
it, that last one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that it was really a relief to step away from that and not
Mhm.
really have any belief system.
Mhm.
And so then and then you're like, well, why would an atheist seek to learn core shamanism? That doesn't make a ton of sense, does it? Well, I was curious. So maybe that would be more agnostic. I don't know. But at my first training, the basic in core shamanism, my first journey to the upper world to meet a teacher, when I got to the second level to meet a teacher, who do you think appeared? Jesus and Mother Mary. And I think I might have said, "Oh shit," out loud, in the midst of this journey because it was shocking because A, they're real, and B, they're here to help me, and C, they're offering me a healing right here on the spot. And so that changes your tune.
And they're not asking you to confess a sin on the spot either, probably.
No, they were not. There was no judgment. It was all love and all compassion and all support.
Yeah.
And just, so beautiful and so
Mhm.
moving, to have that experience. So I
Mm.
shared that with my mom, and she was, much more open to it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What a the challenge of, including our families along the journey, you
Mhm.
know? Yeah, it can be, as you said, not bump free. So if someone, comes to you and they are presenting a challenge in their life, right? I love the word challenge because it's just kind of all encompassing. There could be
Mhm.
lots of different things. How do you consult them on which Kerri to work with? Like, is it Dr. Kerri, the psychiatrist, or is it Kerri, the core shamanic practitioner? For you, it's probably easy. You navigate these worlds, it seems effortlessly, but like, how do you navigate that with a potential person standing in front of you?
That's a great question. And so we typically have a telephone consultation and discuss their needs because you're right. The number one reason people come to me is because they're stuck.
Hmm.
Something is stuck in their life. And hearing their story that, for example, I already have a psychiatrist I'm happy with. Well, they probably don't need me to step into that role then.
Hmm.
Or I have a person I work with for Healing Touch, and they've referred me to you because they know that you understand that work and how it could be helpful for my anxiety condition. So sometimes it is really clear, and sometimes it's not as clear because sometimes people are wanting specific coaching, for example, that underlies an anxiety condition or underlies trauma, and they're wanting very specific goals. I want to be comfortable in my physical body again. So if they're seeking a very specific goal as a coaching goal, we may do this as coaching. But if they're wanting to feel comfortable in their body because I have CPTSD and we're going to be treating PTSD, we're going to be doing that as a psychiatrist. So we
Hmm.
have options. Though I will say that many people who are experiencing spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency conditions will seek me out with the coaching and wellness hat because they're so terrified of being labeled, of being medicated, of being in the
Uh,
psychiatric system, and they just want assistance in being grounded. They want assistance in being clear so that they can move through their emergence with success.
mhm. Yes. I can relate to that fear. In 2008, my life was melting down, and I was a pastor at the time and had resigned and made some poor choices. And one moment, I was curled like in a ball on the kitchen floor, uncontrollably sobbing, and then the next minute, I was fine. And I had people suggesting, my therapist was like, I think you need to go to the hospital. And I'm like, I'm not, I can do it. I'm strong enough. I can get through this. I don't need this, because my fear was, if I go there, they're going to freaking keep me. And I
Mhm.
don't, and it's unknown. Like, if you've never gone through that process, it feels like a black hole that you potentially could never get out of. And it ended up being the most helpful thing I could do in that scenario was actually check myself in, and feel like I was under my own volition. And it was very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that autonomy being respected throughout the process is critical. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's hard to do if someone's floridly psychotic, for example,
Great.
and trying to figure out how much of this is an emergence, how much of this is we've got to dial this down for them so that they can move through their emergence. So
When you're using this word emergence, what does that mean to you?
So, when I think about a spiritual emergence, that could come from any of a number of things. So, sometimes that can come on spontaneously. It could be from vivid dreams or intense deja vu. It could be from a psychedelic medicine or a shamanic experience without substances. It could be from a side effect from a medication, right? There's a lot of things that can bring it on. When people have a Kundalini awakening, when people have um, a psychic opening, right, where new senses, new clairs have appeared, and
Hmm.
they feel like they're losing their mind. I mean, when you're driving down the road and all of a sudden every chunk of tire has all the spirits that from that, the tar pit that became the oil that became the tire, all the spirits are standing there that need to be psychopumped. So you've got this, prehistoric rhinoceros and the prehistoric horse standing there beside the tire chunk on the road. When people have those types of experiences, it's jarring, it's alarming, and they feel like, oh my gosh, is this going to start happening all the time? How am I going to navigate this? What's real and what's not? So yeah, those experiences can be really valuable. Thankfully, that's happened to me, so and I know how that turned out. It all turned out fine. But I've had enough of those types of emergency experiences to be able, not all of them, obviously, there are many types, but I've had several and have been able to figure out how to move through them, some with support of colleagues and mentors, and some I had to figure it on my own because I was young and there was nobody who was going to help me figure it out.
Hmm. And did some of those experiences, those came before you began your core shamanic practitioner training? That was
Some
prior
before,
to
yep.
that.
Yep,
Yeah.
some before, some after.
Would you mind walking us through maybe one that comes to your mind that would, like resonate with people like, oh, wow, okay, I didn't either, yes, I've had that experience, or I didn't even know that was possible?
Well, a really simple, one would be, a few years ago, driving driving down the highway, and my husband's in the passenger seat driving. I live in the country, and I was driving back from town, and there was this guy walking on the side of the road, and he had feet, and he had shoes on, and I could read the Hanes on his underpants because his pants didn't have a belt, and he was just kind of veering into the road a little bit, and I'm trying to get around him. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what was that guy thinking?" And I'm not sure what other words I might have thrown in too because it was really jarring. And my husband said, "Carrie, there wasn't anybody there." But
Your
we
husband was in the car.
Yeah, my husband was in the car, and he's like, "Carrie, there wasn't anybody there, but we did just drive by the cemetery." And so my husband, thankfully, is understanding. He Spirits will wake him up in the night who needs psychopumped, and he will use a lay person style of psychopomp to assist them on. He's not formally trained in that, so thankfully he gets it. Who would have
I
known?
I have not heard this word psychopomp before.
Okay, what is
Can
that?
you Yeah, what is this?
Psychopomp is the conductor of souls, and so you're conducting or assisting a suffering being, a middle world spirit who is here for whatever reason, right? Oftentimes, there are people who died instantly in a car crash. They had a heart attack on a lawnmower. They drowned. A house fire. Oftentimes, a tragic death, and they may not have had the power to move on in their spiritual progression and are still here as suffering beings. So, psychopomp is a way to assist that person, you receiving assistance and power from your helping spirits to assist this person on into the next stage of their spiritual progression, typically to the upper world or lower world, to these compassionate realms. And there is a layperson's method of doing this that I learned years ago from a healer. And it's very simple. Let's say you encounter a spirit and you don't know what to do. You can ask them if they're hungry. You can ask them if they're happy. And if they say yes, move along. But if they're not happy, you can ask them if they would like some help and ask them to ask their ancestors to come assist them. And when they show up, hold on to them tightly. And if that doesn't work, then you ask your ancestors to assist them with their consent. And again, they need to be ready to go. They need to be willing to let go of maybe their land or protecting their lineage if they're kind of stuck here for that stuff. They've got an axe to grind with the neighbor still. Sometimes they're just stuck in an old pattern. They don't know they're dead, kind of like on the Sixth Sense movie. And so they might need a little help in being told, you're not living anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the layperson's method. That's not a core shamanism method of doing it. But I've seen many people use that when they're someone who has that sense of being able to pick up on spirits being present.
And what would be the core shamanism method?
Well, that would be a method that people would learn through a series of classes, just because it's not something you learn when you first start. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to build a foundation of being able to connect with your compassionate helping spirits to assist you in that process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that's done all by yourself.
Mm-hmm. My mom's lay method would be I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. Right? It's like
Yeah.
it's like that Christian, like
Mhm.
what? This is crazy. Get out of here,
Yep. Not
Uh,
every suffering being is a demon.
right.
Vast majority of suffering beings, even if they do harmful things or evil things, are suffering beings who deserve
Yeah.
love and compassionate guidance to the next level in their progression, period. It's a
Yeah.
very different way to approach things.
Yeah. So different. So uh generous,
Mhm.
so loving. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Walk me through different ways that a core shamanic practitioner could help me. Like give me the broad brushstroke because you've talked. Obviously, the psychopumping is one option, but like kind of give me the broad brushstroke. If I'm struggling with something and I
So,
don't want to go to a psychiatrist, what could you help me with?
So, so first off, what we would do is make it clear that what is being done is not medical care. It's not a substitute for medical care. If you need medical care, I'll refer you to someone who can provide that care. But when someone is looking for spiritual healing, healing of their soul, now sometimes they can tell that they've had soul loss. They've been through a traumatic experience. They can tell that they've lost power, that they feel disempowered. And so, what we would do is ask the helping spirits. So, there's a process with this. So, someone can come in saying, I need a soul retrieval. And they might be right, but they might also need three other things. And they might need those things before the soul retrieval. So, I would journey to the helping spirits and ask what this person needs today. What does David need today? And then we would do those exercises, those techniques to assist you today. So you might need extraction, so removal of thought forms. So think about extraction addressing road rage or screw you to that as someone drove by and you forgot to use your turn signal. So that kind of angst that we directed ourselves when you've not made that deadline, you're behind. Oh, what's wrong with me? So a lot of the stuff that needs extracted is stuff that we have sent to ourselves, but we
Mm-hmm.
do pick it up for an environment too.
Mm-hmm.
So the extraction is releasing those, addressing them. Soul retrieval is kind of like it sounds. You're restoring power by helping address soul loss. Now, soul loss in core shamanism does not mean that that soul portion that is distanced, it's not gone, it's distanced from your spirit that's living here. It's distance oftentimes to avoid having been traumatized. So it's not sitting out here in stasis, horribly traumatized. It just needs the opportunity to be brought back.
You would differentiate. It sounded like you were differentiating between soul and spirit. Is that right?
So that's a great question. And really, there. the same thing. They can be used interchangeably, though for a lot of people, saying soul means a spirit in a living body, and spirit meaning a spirit that's not in a living body.
Mm-hmm.
But they are really interchangeable terms. But thanks for asking that, David.
Mm-hmm. I want to go a little bit deeper on the soul retrieval because
Mhm.
I love learning from all of our guests. And so help me understand more about this soul retrieval. It's not, my soul is not completely out of my body, it's just distanced. Did I hear you say in order to avoid experiencing re-trauma, like more trauma? Is that what I'm hearing?
So let's say you were in a car crash and had broken bones and were in pain.
Hmm.
And there may be soul loss at the time of that car crash, where a portion of you left so you didn't fully experience the pain and trauma, and maybe you lost consciousness for a bit, and maybe that was a good thing because help was an hour away and you had broken bones, right?
Hmm.
So that portion leaving may have been to assist you, to help you. But you're no longer in the midst of a car crash, you're physically restored, and now it may be time for that soul portion to be returned, and it needs to be ready to come back, right? So there's making sure that the soul is empowered and able to receive that soul portion, and restoring that soul portion, and then empowering that soul again. It's a multi-step process to restore and empower the soul or spirit of that living being. We
Hmm.
really want that empowerment to be there. It's like an Oreo cookie with the goodies in the middle, but you don't have an Oreo cookie without the empowerment on either side.
Hmm. Is this similar? How would you, I guess, see this in connected to disassociation? Like where there's a disassociating of like oneself. Is there any connection there?
So kind of putting on the psychiatrist hat, right? Um, so the interesting thing about multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder is there are a couple different types, and one of them is possessive type. So people will have portions from soul loss. They will have, or again, psychiatrist hat on, they will have the belief that they're being inundated by spirits possessing them, bothering them, tormenting them. Take that hat off, put on the core shamanism hat. Though in that situation, it's possible that some of those soul portions could be their own. So that's a very rare experience that some people will have and need help at that time, possibly from a psychiatrist, a therapist, and a shamanic practitioner to try to help weave their recovery back together. That typically comes from significant, very young trauma.
Hmm.
But that's a
Hmm.
generalization, obviously.
Hmm. Um, you are talking about helping spirits,
Mhm.
and from what I have read, some of those helping spirits could include angels, animals, ancestors, teachers. Um, a lot of different things, right? How do you build? How have you personally built relationships? Have you connected with these individuals and or plants and right animals? How do you develop that relationship? And then how do they work through you? How does this work, Kerri?
That's a great question, and I don't know if I can entirely answer it,
Of
right?
course, there's a whole, I'm sure, multi-month course I could be
Mhm.
taking on this.
Right. So so as and again, this is, um, as taught by the foundation, you build foundation and then you build capacity. Because as you're doing healing work, you need to be able to hold and pass more power. So in order to do extraction requires a level of power, but then soul retrieval may require even more power. And then depossession would require even more power to be able to hold and be able to pass. So so learning how to connect with those helping spirits, inviting them here to the middle world, to the space where we're doing the work, extremely important. But you may be seeking support from the tree outdoors that you have an intense and long-standing relationship with, and that tree helps to bring you power when you need it. You may have relationships with celestial beings like angels and archangels and ascended masters, and they can be incredibly valuable when you're doing this work. So, as people explore their own experiences with both the upper world and lower world, they will build relationships sometimes with deities of faith that they never knew anything about. Like this lady with six blue arms came to help me. I don't know who she is, right? So some people can have fascinating experiences with gods and goddesses of faiths that they've never touched before. So it can be a real mix, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's quite fascinating.
Mhm. And do you have personally certain individuals that you work with, or is there more of like a generic, like, oh, I'm sensing like this genericness of like ancestors? You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
ancestor bucket, as opposed to, no, my Aunt Martha is the one who really I partner with to do a lot of work. Like, you know what I mean? How does that work for you?
So that's a great question. So I have multiple helping spirits in the lower world that are animals that assist me on a variety of things. So depending on what type of divination I'm doing, I'm going to go to different helpers for that. For all the treatments that we do, soul retrieval, extraction, passing power, depossession, I have helpers that help me with all of those in the lower world. In
Hmm.
the upper world, I have teachers. Some of them are ancestors. Some of them are ancestors that are very distant. Some are ancestors that are not so distant. And I have, like I said, Jesus and Mother Mary, they're kind of the, pinnacle of teachers, right? But I have other teachers too that I go to for different types of questions. So a lot of times going to the teachers in the upper world is to gain understanding, wisdom, questions, and sometimes divination. But I also go up there for my own healing. I also um, have bring their assistance in for other healing for patients, or I'm sorry, for clients. So I work with them both.
And when you say you go there, what does that mean? How do you go there?
So the first step in when people are trying to build their independent spiritual practice and are interested in core shamanism is learning how to journey. And this is with sonic driving. So not with substances, it's with sonic driving. So this could be a didgeridoo, a drum, a rattle. It could be chanting or humming, but drumming is, I think, the most common. Most people recognize that. There's a certain range to really try to help elicit trance. You're trying to go into those theta waves primarily. And that assists you in setting aside the conscious mind so that you can get to those realms more easily and have that experience of connecting with your helping spirits.
Yes. I have had this experience uh, myself, and I haven't gone through core shamanic training. Although, just doing this research with you, I'm like, this feels very attractive to me.
Hmm.
But I actually have done quite a bit of training in mediumship and then channeling.
Hmm.
And in the channeling training, that individual, her name is Sean Randall. She was featured in the Tuning In documentary, and her ex- her teaching is basically that these entities are there to express unconditional love to you. They are not there to just give some big message to the world, although that might come at some point. For her, channeling is about unconditional love. And so, in the process of that, I have had four entities that I just hang out with regularly when I drop in and go there. And one of those individuals is Jesus. I mean, when he first started showing up, I was hanging out with these other two individuals. One, this little like elf creature that he told me his name is Elvin, and then this other entity that is so huge named Archon. I didn't come up with this stuff. It just comes, right? I was not on medicine. And then all of a sudden, one day, Jesus shows up. I was pissed, Kerri. I was like, how dare you come back? I've spent so much of my life focusing on you. And like all of a sudden, you're coming back in the scene, and it was transformative. It
Yep.
was absolutely transformative. And what's crazy for me, who showed up eventually alongside of him, someone who I had no connection with, which was Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa started showing up. And so she shows up all the time. And It's very fascinating because I had no prior connection, with this person. I didn't do any studying of her or whatever. So anyway, I just find your experience here very fascinating. Um, so I'm
So
curious. Go ahead.
I want to mention one of the things about channeling. So this has been something that's come up in when I'm teaching for the foundation, and and outer space is still the middle world
Okay.
unless you've passed through a boundary. You are still in the middle world.
Mm.
So when people are channeling, they could be channeling middle world beings,
Mhm. Yes.
possibly from another planet, possibly from another dimension, but they may be middle world beings. And so that's one of the things to discover. Now, obviously, Jesus showing up, Mother Teresa showing up, we know for sure that they're probably in a good, compassionate place.
Oh, yeah,
you
yeah,
know? But that's one of the pieces that those kind of ethical guidelines, right? Those rails are there to help keep you safe
yeah.
when you're learning how to journey with the foundation is making sure that you are where you think you are.
Ah,
And so we do a lot of things to help people build that capacity, which is
yeah,
why it's so important to keep practicing journeying, which is
yeah,
what you're doing, which is great.
yes. One of the foundational questions that I have wrestled with and probably still do is when I am having these experiences on a journey, is this just an aspect of my brain making up this entity? I am making up that Jesus is showing up and sharing this information. I'm making up that, like, Mother Teresa is. Um, this is a very, I ask basic questions here, Kerri, because
It's
I like to learn, and I think the average person probably has these questions at some point along the way. Is this just an aspect of my brain that is making this up, even though it's beneficial, even though it's helpful, it's not harming anybody? I'm not asking this question to core shamanic practitioner, Kerri. Okay. Put her away. I'm asking this to Dr. Kerri Husman, the psychiatrist. Is this an aspect of my brain that is making this up?
well, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you two answers. So one is that when you're altering consciousness, so you're going into those theta waves, right? There's a greater likelihood, scientifically speaking, that you are going to be more aware of the other, that which is not self, that which is not you. So when people are having experiences here in my office, as I'm looking through my little chairs here, so people having ketamine or Spravato experiences, we record those sessions for their protection and mine. They're video recorded, but they will feel like someone standing right beside them, and then they're thinking, "It felt like it was my grandma." Now, they're having a medicine experience, right? And no one was near them, physically near them, but they were having that sense of other present. So, people having an expanded state of consciousness could have an enhanced chance of experiencing the other. Now, I'm going to shift and say something about archetypes. So, Carl Jung spoke extensively about archetypes. This is where our shadow work comes from, and we're all quite um, you know, enamored with the work that he's done, even if it is fairly complex to do that shadow work. But Michael Harner, who founded the foundation, and Carl were contemporaries and had some interesting conversations about this very issue. And one of those conversations, um, Michael Harner asked Carl Jung about the use of the word archetype because Michael said, "Well, from what I've discovered in all these decades, is the spirits are real. Why'd you have to use archetypes? Why'd you have to throw it off for everybody?" And Carl Jung's response was archetypes was a lot easier for people to understand and accept. But if I had to do it all over again, I would use the word spirit. Fascinating. It would have been lovely to have been a mouse in the corner of that room, right? The other thing that I've learned from the foundation is that questioning everything, once you put that away and decide, oh, the spirits are real, I'm done, that's not how it goes. You need to continue to question. You need to continue to journey. You need to continue to ask and continue to grow your understanding. So just accepting everything blindly is not the message. Keep asking.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned the use of psychedelics, and yet, from my understanding, is that core shamanism is a substance-free experience or modality, and yet you also utilize psychedelics to help individuals. How do you how do you see that? How do you integrate those substance-free and then with psychedelics?
Well, it's a great question, and there's a couple different things to think about. So, when someone has such severe treatment resistant depression, OCD, PTSD, anorexia, alcoholism, whatever it may be, it's going to be really hard for them to engage in core shamanic journeying and practice of that. It's
Hmm.
really hard. They can't get out of bed. They're barely functioning. They're probably not working. You know, when people need that level of treatment, they're really, really, really struggling. Okay. So I look at it as an option for those people. And what's been beautiful is some patients that I've been doing this a long time, and psychiatry at least. And I have some patients who I've known for, decades and have seen them through ECT and seen them through TMS and multiple hospitalizations and 20 med trials, right? And now they've received ketamine or Spravato and they have a life again. Finally, they've done all the things. So it's phenomenal. But it would, if they were seeking to build their independent spiritual practice, now it would probably be easier for them to do so because they're not so severely impacted by their mental health condition.
Hmm.
So I feel it
How do
has a
you
place as a medicine.
hmm I'm hearing that use of psychedelics more from a therapeutic perspective, almost the like you're speaking about that from the psychiatrist perspective. What is your view or experience in terms of utilizing psychedelics to open up that spiritual experience and or do work like that is the ultimate journey
Mhm.
like blast off like how do you see that in terms of more of those shamanic experiences?
I think for some individuals, it can be incredibly valuable. What I oftentimes deal with in my coaching and wellness practice are the people who've gone to another country, had a handful of ayahuasca journeys in a handful of days, and come back to their full time clinical practice and can't function because they didn't have any time for integration. They didn't realize what they'd be integrating, and they're stuck.
Yeah.
And so in those situations, a lot of times we're using some grounding and clearing techniques from healing touch, some spiritual support from core shamanism. We may be doing some coaching because there may be some ancestral issues that have come up that they need to navigate and heal. So realistically, it can be a beautiful, wonderful thing, but oftentimes it's not set up in such a way that people are getting enough time and space to fully integrate the experience after the fact. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I get called on to help with those things.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty common. I'm curious about, we've talked a lot about an individual going through a spiritual emergence and like their own life, depression, anxiety, stuckness. I'm curious about the physical land that we live on. I'm curious about the homes that we live on and the role that a core shamanic practitioner could play in somehow clearing, enhancing, creating a healthy environment. Like, what role couldn't you play in that? And how? What are the challenges that people bring you?
Oh, well, um, let me, there are several that I can think of. So one of the things is what's happened on that land beforehand. So this could go back eons, obviously. And so a lot of times the person may not know who has the question. They may say, spirits are bothering us in the house. We don't know what to do. Can you get rid of them? Usually it's something along those lines. It's
Mhm.
not, we're trying to make friends or we've tried to make friends and it didn't work out. And so a journey is really important. Some of this can be done by distance, so the person might draw a picture, even a, kind of like as if an architect has drawn the doors and where the furniture is, and here's what my house looks like, and you try to do this virtually from a distance, which I've done. I've also done these in person. And then you're finding things like portals that need to be closed, and you're helping spirits teach you how to close them if you've never had any formal training in that, and assisting usually large numbers of spirits that have been drawn to this space for whatever reason.
What are some reasons why large amounts of spirits would be there?
Um, there may have been a massacre at that site eons ago. There may have been the person may be on medication that makes them more vulnerable to spirits being drawn to them, and so they may be working with someone on that, while you're assisting and just clearing up and assisting those spirits on. So sometimes it's lots and lots of psychopomp, hundreds and hundreds of spirits sometimes that you're assisting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Um, what is your favorite part of all that you do? Like when you were talking about so many different things, like what do you like? What lights you up where you're just like, oh yeah, I love this part?
Um, that's really hard. That's like unfair almost. So it's you have to put all your own stuff aside, right? When you're working on shrinking someone's tumors,
Mm,
right? And you're helping spirits or assisting in shrinking tumors or them disappearing. So when when someone's broken an arm and is able to go skiing 4 weeks later because their bone that was a clean break has healed enough to be able to ski in 4 weeks, in someone who's over 60. When you experience those sorts of miraculous healings, it's really hard to not be just, "Oh my gosh, I just get to be the middleman here. This is so awesome," right?
right.
But it's not about me at all, right? I'm just the middle person. I'm just asking for this to be directed to this person. But that is pretty amazing. On the other hand, people with chronic mental health conditions getting better finally. Oh, I mean, because I've been seeing the snapshots for years of the
Yeah.
suffer and the struggle, and seeing them be able to live their life and travel and connect with their families, and oh, it's beautiful.
Hmm. One of the things that I have discovered in the last several years of connecting with so many facilitators and practitioners and is that I find that there are some individuals that are very, very passionate about their modality,
Mhm.
right? This is like, okay, breath work, okay, mediumship, okay, shamanic training, okay, whatever it is, right? Reiki. And there can seem to be an over fascination with the actual modality that it seems like to me sometimes the deep love for the person gets lost in the process. And so, like, how do you navigate that yourself? Because you are obviously a brilliant, lifelong learner. You will, go to your grave probably getting some other educational nugget because you just love learning, right?
True.
And yet, I also hear that there's this compassion and empathy and care for the individual. Like, do you find that to be the case that some people are just passionate more about the modality and like forget about the people in the process? And like, how do you navigate all that?
Well, I want to bring the modality that's going to make the most difference for this person. What's going to get them the most mileage? And what I've found through people dying, I mean, the death process is just so revealing and teaches the observer so many wonderful lessons. So one thing I've found is, for example, that if you do a healing touch session shortly before a core shamanism session, the work holds longer. So the healing touch work holds longer, meaning that energetic field which has nothing to do with the spirit, but the spirit lives there, right? Two different modalities. You're working with energy or you're working with power, not the same. But if you do them in succession, I've seen that the work holds longer. Now, I have no one to ask. I have no one that I know who's trained in core shamanism and healing touch that I could ask that question of. I would love that if someone hears this, please reach out to see if they've noticed that too. But what's interesting about core shamanism is that it can unravel over the course of months or even years. Sometimes like to the day, 2 years later, the message that was received in the divination part of the session all of a sudden makes sense.
Mm.
And you'll get this message back saying, "Oh my gosh, we know now what that meant." And, because you've done multiple other things too, and, to help their spirit be more empowered, more full, nice and plump, if you want to call it that. Um, so so I don't know that I can answer the question well because I'm much more aligned with doing the right thing for that person. And sometimes, when someone comes in with a functional neurologic disorder, which is the thing I really enjoy treating, and I'll be seeing someone for that later today, is, they're having all these physical ailments, but their brain is creating most of the pain and suffering to try to protect them and keep them safe. They may have had an injury that, the pain maintained itself, migrated around the body, has nothing to do with a physiologic condition at this point. It just needs safety, deeply reinstated, restored. And I've got a variety of tools to use for that. I'm certified in multiple therapies for that. But I can't necessarily look at that person, sure, could I whip out my pendulum? That would look a little weird in psychiatry. But, we talk about the different tools and create a path together. So I'm not wed. I might be thinking, oh yeah, this person needs HMR, this person needs EAT. No, no, no. We'll talk about it and we'll do, again, respecting that autonomy. We don't want
Mhm.
someone to feel disempowered in the midst of their psychotherapy, of all things. We want
Mhm.
them to feel empowered, and we'll try a few things.
Mhm. For people who are interested in core shamanic training, I know that you are not only a practitioner, but you're a teacher there at the foundation. Um, if someone's interested in this, what would be like their next step?
So, um, I've got my dates up, and they periodically go up through the year as far as dates for in-person and virtual training. That's on mammothhills.com. That's my website for the training. But people can go to the foundation's website as well and look at the workshops, and all the practitioners who have theirs listed will be there. And so what works best for someone depending on their time zone, depending on the location. I'm here in Iowa, so if you can drive in the Midwest, great, but a lot of times we have to fly for these classes because there's so few of us.
Mhm. Is that program like a set curriculum of like start to finish, or is it more of like pick what you want, or how does it work?
It's a little bit of both. There are subclasses that need to be taken in a specific order, especially the healing series. You need to learn how to work with certain levels to be able to move on to the next one. But there are several knowledge courses that can be taken at any time after you've taken the initial basic or the initial classes through the online program. So there's some
Mhm.
equivalence there, and thankfully, each class lists at the very top what prerequisites are required.
Correct. Sorry. Yeah. You also have a podcast called Journey a Day,
Mm.
which I have, kind of clicked through like, oh, interesting. Let's check this out. What is Journey a Day? And specifically, I found that the process was very interesting, like the terms of and agreements that I
Mhm.
had to make in order to participate in this.
Yep.
So tell us
Yep.
about it.
So it's designed that way because, for one, it's not teaching how to journey.
Mhm.
So the point of it is people have had journey training through the
Mhm.
foundation or other similar methods with sonic driving. So wherever they've trained, great. And then they have to basically say, I'm not going to be doing this while I'm driving or operating equipment, that I am properly trained to do this, and then go through that disclaimer. And then every day there's a new posting of a journey a day. So this is a journey question. So, one of the biggest things that I've noticed about students is they take the initial workshop to learn to journey, and then they go home back to their very busy, hectic lives and don't journey. and then it gets rusty, and then they kind of forget, and then, it's like, oh, darn, I guess I wasted that money, and that's it. They don't move any further along in the process. So the goal for this is for anyone who wants to build their relationships with helping spirits. There's middle world journeys, there's upper and lower world journeys. There are journeys that are designed to be repeated. And these journeys all come from the helping spirits. So I just ask them, and they provide those journey questions for us. And it's there to help people step right into a brief 10-minute daily journey so that they can keep building those relationships and ask some hard, challenging questions without disclosing any content from any of the coursework from the foundation. So that coursework needs to be protected and journey methods aren't being taught. But this piece is that piece in between to help people practice.
Beautiful. So someone's listening today. Obviously, we've got the information on where they can go to learn about being a core shamanic practitioner, but they're experiencing a spiritual emergence, or maybe they're having some psychological challenges. What would be the best way that people can work with you? Is it a one-on-one session? Are there group sessions? Like, help us understand that.
So I do offer group breathwork using neurodynamic breathwork in my psychiatric practice, and then I do have small group for ketamine administration, which helps people save money as well as, um, you know, when a bunch of people who've all struggled through pretty significant mental health issues can come together, and it's just a pleasant, supportive experience.
Yeah.
But if people are looking to work with me, they can just go to eastwindhealingcenter.com. That's the healing center right here we're at today. And that takes people to both of my bios, one for each practice, and the websites for each practice.
Wonderful. If someone is in the midst of a spiritual emergence, as you call it, and they're having some sort of like clairs are opening up, or they're having these different experiences with spirits, and they're feeling a little overwhelmed, as you said, like, whew, okay, how do I integrate all of this? What encouragement would you give them today?
Well, I would say, who's your team? And that for each person is a unique set of people. It might be a faith leader in their community who's important to them. It might be a parent or partner or child or sibling. It might be a close friend, but you need somebody to anchor you. You need to be grounded in some way. Now, if you've got people around you who are preaching something you're not interested in, right, and it's terrifying you, then finding other support is going to be important. Now, there are several organizations that have lists of practitioners for spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. One of them is the Integrative Mental Health University, and they have a list of spiritual emergence coaches that are all over the world. But that's one of several. So that can be a way to find someone quickly if you're needing someone in your vicinity. Let's say you need someone in the Philippines. You're going to be looking at these. There are several international organizations to find that. But feel free to reach out to me too, because I've got some connections and I might be able to help.
Love that. Kerri, thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey, educating us on so many different things, and doing it in such a generous and understandable way. It is just great to be with you today. So thank you.
Thank you again, David. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Awaken Magazine podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and our other conversations, would you mind taking a moment to leave a 5-star review and maybe even a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? That's one of the ways that you can give back to the show and help us reach more people. And of course, feel free to share the episode with a friend. And if you're not already on our email list, we send out an inspiring email every Monday morning full of articles and interviews. Just head on over to awakenedmagazine.com and click subscribe and join for free. Our hope is that all the resources we share will help our world continue awakening to love.